Today's program is brought to you by OTCStockShark.com. For the latest and greatest OTC and Pink Sheets information, sign up for your account at OTCStockShark.com. Thank you for tuning in to TBC Today. I'm Brandon Vincent.
And I'm Angelina Soriano.
In financial news, renewed worries over a global economic slowdown weighed on the market, leaving U.S. stocks in a tight range euphoria as increased deal activity waned. Jumping between small gains and losses, the Dow Jones Industrial Average edged up 5 points to 10,219 at midday. The measure had been up as much as 91 points earlier in the session. Investors were initially encouraged by a counteroffer from Hewlett-Packard for 3PAR at a 33% premium to an offer Dell made for the data storage company last week. 3PAR's shares surged 41%, while HP slipped 2.2% and Dell fell 1.2%. However, the market's excitement over the offer, which came on the back of a strong week for deal activity, was short-lived. Recent signs of economic weakness remained heavy on the investors' minds. The Nasdaq Composite dropped 0.4% to 2,171, while the S&P 500 stock index squeezed out a gain of 0.1% to 1,073. In U.S. news, around noon, Michael Rose, a medical student from Brooklyn, approached some of the hundreds of protesters who had gathered near Ground Zero to rally against a mosque and Islamic center planned for the neighborhood. Mr. Rose carried a handwritten sign in favor of the mosque. It read, "Religious tolerance is what makes America great," and his presence caused a stir. An argument broke out, punctuated by angry fingers pointed in the student's face. One man leaned in and hissed that if the police were not present, Mr. Rose would be in danger. Before any threats could be carried out, the police intervened, dragged Mr. Rose away from the crowd, and insisted that he return to the separate area 1 block away, where supporters of the project had been asked to stand. Minutes later, as Mr. Rose was still shaking off the encounter, he turned to find the man back at his side. The man had followed the student up the street, and the two stared at each other for a tense moment, at which point the man said, "I'm sorry." The dual protests against and for the Islamic Center, part of a complex on Park Place called Park 51, had taunts, tensions, and the occasional minor scuffle. Around 500 opponents of the mosque stood in a blocked-off area, singing patriotic songs and speaking of a hijacked constitution, while about 200 supporters held a nearby counter-protest. But the exchanging of words, although harsh at times, never led to blows or other violence. No arrests or injuries were reported by the authorities. In international news, a dismissed policeman apparently sprayed automatic gunfire into a busload of foreign tourists in the Philippine capital of Manila, killing at least 7 people before he was shot and killed after a dramatic bid to get his job back went badly wrong. Hostage taker Rolando Mendoza was shot in the head and killed by armed police when they stormed the bus amid torrential rain late in the evening after the bus driver escaped and said the 55-year-old former police officer has begun shooting at 15 vacationers from Hong Kong. Philippine officials and China's foreign ministry later confirmed that at least 7 tourists had been killed, apparently killed by Mr. Mendoza. 4 appeared to leave the bus unassisted, while the condition of the remaining hostages remains unclear. The bloody brawl will likely damage the Philippines' efforts to rev up its tourism industry, especially in the lucrative East Asian market. The recently elected administration of President Aquino has identified boosting tourism as one of its primary policy goals to help create jobs in a country where 1 in 10 of the workforce seeks employment overseas. The killings also set back Mr. Aquino's efforts to stifle the violence and lawlessness which afflict many parts of the Philippines, especially in remote southern provinces, and demonstrate that the country is a safe place for investors and tourists alike. Compounding his problems, the Philippine news agency reported that attackers shot and killed a South Korean national and abducted 2 compatriots after stopping their van in another part of Manila. The 2 survivors were later released.
If you have a structured settlement or annuity and are not sure if you should sell, then this free structured settlement guide from Client First is for you.
Client First showed me how I could customize my settlement my way.
This free guide shows you how to get a lump sum and keep your payments, get immediate cash in 48 hours, and much, much more.
Now I'm able to buy a home and still keep my payments.
Call the number on the screen today for your free Client First settlement guide. Get a lump sum and keep your payment.
In entertainment news, Piranha 3D is a movie that wants to have its cake and eat it too. The entertainment formula behind this short and nasty movie is sloppy and simple. Young women dance around in and frequently shed their bikinis and are then devoured by swarms of predatory fish. So there is an abundant display of flesh, both bared and half-eaten. The only potentially interesting critical question that arises is to how the stereoscopic format serves the film's formal ambitions. Apart from a few semi-clever startle effects, a dropped anchor hurtling outward toward the audience, a tipsy girl's vomit doing the same, the answer is more or less what you would expect. A third dimension turns the kind of bouncing kinetic naughtiness most commonly encountered on the laptop screen into something much larger and rounder. Hungry fish and shredded limbs do not really benefit from the same kind of amplification. Piranha 3D, loosely remade from the 1978 Piranha, one of many spectacles of watery perdition that followed the bloody, lucrative wake of Jaws, begins with a half-witty moment of pop cultural homage that may temporarily raise your hopes. In tech news, a new kind of chlorophyll that catches sunlight from just beyond the red end of the visible light spectrum has been discovered. The new pigment extends the known range of light that is usable by most photosynthetic organisms. Harnessing this pigment's power could lead to biofuel-generating algae that are super efficient, using a greater spread of sunlight than thought possible. This is a very important new development and is the first new type of chlorophyll discovered in this type of organism in 60 years. The newfound pigment, dubbed chlorophyll F, absorbs light most efficiently at a wavelength around 706 nanometers, just beyond the red end of the visible spectrum. This unique absorbance appears to occur thanks to a chemical decoration known as formal group on the chlorophyll's carbon number 2. That chemical tweak probably allows the algae-like organism that makes chlorophyll F to conduct photosynthesis while living beneath other photosynthesizers that capture all the other usable sunlight. Previously, there were 4 known chlorophylls made by plants and other photosynthesizing organisms that generate oxygen: A, B, C, and D. Chlorophyll A, the standard green type, is found in photosynthesizers from algae to higher plants. It absorbs mostly blue light around 465 nanometers and red light around 665 nanometers. Chlorophylls B and C are found in fewer organisms and absorb light in a smaller range, as chlorophyll A does, but shifted a bit. Chlorophyll D, found in a specific group of bacteria, absorbs the most light at roughly 697 nanometers, a slightly shorter wavelength than the absorption of the new chlorophyll. While some bacteria make chlorophyll-like pigments that absorb even longer wavelengths of light, these creatures aren't harnessing light to split water. The step in photosynthesis that generates oxygen, scientists didn't think that wavelengths absorbed by chlorophyll F would have enough energy to split water either, but it turns out they do. The find may also enable scientists to engineer algae that are more efficient producers of oil for biofuels. Microbes bearing the new chlorophyll could soak up rays that most microbes can't make use of. In health news, an Iowa company broadened a nationwide recall of its eggs to 380 million after some of its facilities were linked to an outbreak of salmonella that has sickened hundreds of people across the country. The outbreak, which federal officials said was the largest of its type related to eggs in years, began in May, just weeks before new government safety rules went into effect that were intended to greatly reduce the risk of salmonella in eggs. The company behind the recall, Wright County Eggs of Iowa, is owned by Jack DeCoster, who has had run-ins with regulators over poor or unsafe working conditions, environmental violations, the harassment of workers, and the hiring of illegal immigrants. Dr. Christopher Braden, acting director of the Foodborne Disease Department at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, said the salmonella outbreak began in May, when several states began seeing an increase in the number of cases of a common type of bacterial illness known as salmonella. The numbers continued to grow, and in June and July, a database used to track disease nationwide found that the number of cases had risen from a historical average of about 50 a week to about 200. Public health officials in California, Minnesota, and Colorado determined that many of the people who had gotten sick had eaten food containing eggs. Further investigation traced many tainted eggs to Wright County Egg. The company announced that it was recalling 228 million eggs that it had sold since mid-May. Then it added another 152 million eggs to the recall. Many of the affected eggs have long since been cooked and eaten, but millions could still be stored in refrigerators. Thank you for tuning in to TBC Today. I'm Brandon Vincent.
And I'm Angelina Soriano.
The makeup in today's program is provided by MAC Cosmetics.